Jungkook discovers Taehyung's hidden love letter after 5 years, only to uncover a painful secret that changes everything between them. Jungkook found Taehyung's love letter hidden for 5 years, but it wasn't what he expected. "Don't open that envelope, Jungkook." Taehyung's voice came from the hallway, just as Jungkook's fingers broke through the thin layer of dust covering the old wooden compartment. Jungkook froze. The envelope was already halfway out. For 5 years, the abandoned house had stood untouched at the edge of the property, its windows clouded with dust, and its rooms carrying the faint smell of cedar, old paper, and rain-soaked wood. Jungkook had only returned because the owner had finally decided to renovate it. He had never expected to find something hidden inside the wall. And judging from Taehyung's expression, neither had he. Jungkook slowly turned. Taehyung stood beneath the doorway, pale and breathless, one hand gripping the frame as if he needed it to remain standing. The silence between them seemed louder than the thunder outside. "What is this?" Jungkook asked. Taehyung swallowed. "Put it back." "That's not an answer." "Jungkook." The way Taehyung said his name made Jungkook stop. There was fear in it. Not embarrassment. Not anger. Fear. Jungkook looked down at the envelope again. The paper was yellowed with age, its edges softened by years of hiding. Across the front, written in Taehyung's unmistakable handwriting, were 6 words. "For the person I could never tell." Jungkook's heartbeat stumbled. He looked at Taehyung. "Who was it for?" Taehyung said nothing. "Taehyung, please." That single word changed the atmosphere. Jungkook had known Taehyung for almost 6 years. He knew the little things nobody else noticed. The way Taehyung rubbed his thumb against his index finger whenever he was nervous, the way he hummed under his breath when he was trying to hide sadness, the way he avoided eye contact whenever a conversation became too personal. But he had never seen him look this frightened. Jungkook carefully pulled the envelope free. Behind it was a narrow cavity in the wall. Inside lay a small metal box. Jungkook stared. Taehyung closed his eyes. "Oh no." "What?" "You found everything." Jungkook looked back at him. "Everything." Taehyung stepped into the room. Rain hammered against the windows. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Jungkook placed the envelope on the table. "I'm not going to open it." Taehyung looked surprised. "You're not?" "No." "Why?" "Because you asked me not to." Something softened in Taehyung's eyes. Then he looked at the envelope. "I didn't think you'd find it." "What is it?" Taehyung gave a bitter smile. "A mistake." Jungkook frowned. "You wrote a love letter and hid it in a wall." "I was 17. You wrote this 5 years ago." "Yes." "And you never gave it to the person." "No." "Why?" Taehyung looked toward the rain-streaked window. "Because I found out the truth before I could." Jungkook waited. Taehyung finally whispered, "The person I wrote it for didn't exist." Jungkook's eyebrows drew together. "What does that mean?" Taehyung didn't answer. Instead, he opened the metal box. Inside were photographs. Dozens of them. Some were pictures of the house. Others showed a young Taehyung sitting alone on the wooden steps, smiling at someone outside the frame. Jungkook picked up one photograph. On the back was a date. 5 years earlier. And beneath the date were 3 words. "He saved me." "Who is he?" Jungkook asked. Taehyung's face changed. "He was the reason I wrote the letter." "Was he?" Taehyung nodded. "He died." The room became unbearably quiet. Jungkook put the photograph down. "I'm sorry." Taehyung sat on the edge of the table. "I never told anyone. Not even me. Especially not you." Jungkook stared at him. "Why especially me?" Taehyung's fingers tightened around the edge of his sleeve. Because if I told you, you would have asked questions. And you didn't want me to. I was afraid of the answers. Jungkook felt something tighten in his chest. He had expected a romantic confession. He had expected perhaps a secret crush, an old relationship, something embarrassing and bittersweet. He hadn't expected grief. He hadn't expected death. And he certainly hadn't expected the strange sensation that something about the letter was connected to him. Taehyung reached for the envelope. I'll destroy it. Jungkook caught his wrist. Wait. Taehyung looked at him. You don't have to destroy it. You shouldn't read it. I won't. Then why are you stopping me? Jungkook released his wrist. Because maybe you shouldn't carry it alone anymore. Taehyung stared at him for a long moment. His eyes glistened. You always say things like that. Like what? Things that make it harder to leave. Jungkook didn't know how to respond. Taehyung stood. Let's go. They walked through the old house without speaking. At the doorway, Taehyung stopped. Jungkook. Yes, if you ever find another letter. He hesitated. Don't assume it's about love. Then he walked into the rain. Jungkook remained beneath the roof. His eyes drifted back toward the abandoned room. Toward the hidden compartment. Toward the envelope. He didn't know why, but something inside him refused to believe Taehyung had told him everything. And he was right. Because later that night, after Taehyung had gone home, Jungkook returned to the house alone. He didn't open the letter. Instead, he searched the cavity behind the wall. His fingers touched something cold. Another envelope. This one was much smaller. And unlike the first one, it had Jungkook's name written across the front. He stared at it for several seconds. Then he whispered to the empty room. What were you trying to tell me? Episode 2, 5 years earlier. 5 years ago, Taehyung had believed that secrets were safer when they were buried. He had been wrong. At 17, he spent most evenings at the old house because it belonged to his grandmother, the only person who seemed to understand when he wanted silence. The house smelled of old books and jasmine. Taehyung loved it. It was where he wrote, where he drew, where he could sit beside the window for hours without pretending to be happy. Then someone arrived. His name was Minyi. He was 19, quiet and awkward, with a habit of carrying a small notebook everywhere. They met because Minyi repaired the broken fence outside the house. At first they barely spoke. Then they started sharing meals. Then secrets. Then dreams. Minyi told Taehyung he wanted to become a photographer. Taehyung told him he wanted to write stories. They laughed about how impossible both dreams seemed. You'll write someday, Minyi told him. You'll take pictures someday. Promise. Promise. But Minyi never got the chance. One evening he disappeared. The next morning, Taehyung learned there had been an accident. For months, Taehyung couldn't accept it. He kept returning to the house. He kept expecting Minyi to appear at the gate. Eventually, he wrote the letter. Not because he believed Minyi would read it, but because there were words that had nowhere else to go. I loved the way you made ordinary days feel important. I loved the way you never asked me to explain my sadness. I loved the way you believed I could become someone even when I didn't believe it myself. Taehyung stopped writing there. He couldn't finish it. Instead, he hid the letter inside the wall. He thought nobody would ever find it. 5 years later, Jungkook did. And now the secret was no longer buried. Episode 3, the second envelope. Jungkook carried the second envelope home. He didn't open it immediately. For hours it sat on his desk while he tried to convince himself that respecting Taehyung's privacy mattered more than his curiosity. but the handwriting kept drawing his eyes back. His name was written across the front. Not a nickname. Not an initial. His full name. Finally, Jungkook opened it. Inside was only one sheet of paper. Jungkook *. If you're reading this, then I failed to keep my promise. Jungkook's breathing slowed. I promised myself I would never tell you why I became afraid of losing you. The truth is, you remind me of someone I lost. Jungkook stopped reading. His fingers trembled. He continued. Not because you look like him, you don't. Not because you speak like him, you don't. You remind me of him because you stayed. Jungkook lowered the letter. The room suddenly felt too small. He remembered every time Taehyung had pushed him away. Every unexplained argument. Every moment Taehyung had looked at him, as though he wanted to say something but couldn't. The mystery wasn't about an old lover. It was about grief. And somehow, Jungkook had become tangled inside it. Episode 4, The Truth Between Them. Taehyung finally told him everything. They sat together in the quiet kitchen, while rain tapped against the glass. I thought if I got close to you, Taehyung said, I would eventually lose you too. Jungkook looked at him. So you kept pushing me away? Yes. That hurt. I know. You could have trusted me. I was 17. And now. Taehyung looked down. Now I'm still afraid. Jungkook reached across the table. You don't have to be. Taehyung laughed softly. You can't promise that. No. Jungkook's fingers rested beside his. But I can promise that I'll tell you when I'm scared. Taehyung looked up. And if I tell you I'm scared, I'll stay. Taehyung's eyes filled with tears. For the first time he didn't hide them. Episode 5, The Photograph. The final photograph was found beneath the floorboards. It showed Minnie standing beside Taehyung. But there was something strange about it. In the background stood a much younger Jungkook. Taehyung stared at the photograph in disbelief. I didn't know you were there. Jungkook studied it. I don't remember this. Then he noticed the date. The photograph had been taken on the exact day they first met. Jungkook looked at Taehyung. You knew me before I knew you. Taehyung shook his head. No. He turned the photograph over. There was writing on the back. Some people enter our lives twice, once by accident, once by choice. Neither of them spoke. The mystery wasn't supernatural. It was coincidence. But it was the kind of coincidence that made the past feel strangely connected to the present. Taehyung finally smiled through his tears. Maybe Minnie was right. About what? That ordinary days can become important. Episode 6, What the Letter Really Meant. Jungkook returned the original letter to Taehyung. You should keep it. I thought you wanted to know what it said. I did. And Jungkook smiled. I think I finally understand. Taehyung looked confused. What? The letter wasn't really about losing someone. Taehyung stared at him. It was about learning how to love someone without being afraid that love would disappear. Taehyung's expression softened. You sound like a writer. Maybe you taught me. They laughed. For the first time, the old house didn't feel haunted by the past. It felt peaceful. Episode 7, The Letter They Chose to Keep. Months later, Taehyung returned to the house with a new envelope. Jungkook noticed immediately. Another secret. Taehyung smiled. No. He handed it to him. Jungkook opened it. Inside was a single page. 5 years ago, I wrote a letter because I didn't know how to say goodbye. Today, I'm writing another because I finally know how to stay. Jungkook looked at him. Taehyung's cheeks turned red. You don't have to say anything. Jungkook folded the letter carefully. Then he stepped closer. I think I do. What? I'll stay too. Taehyung smiled. Outside, the old garden moved beneath the evening wind. The house remained the same. The wooden walls, the dusty windows, the jasmine, the quiet hallway where so many memories had gathered. But something had changed. The letter that had once been hidden for 5 years was no longer a symbol of regret. It had become proof that love could survive even after loss. Not always in the form people expected. Sometimes love was a goodbye. Sometimes it was a memory. Sometimes it was the courage to remain. And sometimes, after years of misunderstanding, it was simply two people sitting together in silence, finally realizing that they had never needed perfect words. They had only needed the courage to stop running. Jungkook looked at Taehyung. Do you still miss him? Taehyung nodded. Every day. Jungkook squeezed his hand. And you're okay with that? Taehyung smiled. I think I finally understand that loving someone new doesn't erase someone from the past. Jungkook nodded. It makes room for another chapter. Taehyung looked toward the old wall where the letter had been hidden. Maybe that's what he wanted. What? For me to keep living. Jungkook smiled. Then let's make sure you do. The sun disappeared beyond the horizon. And for the first time in 5 years, Taehyung left the old house without looking back. The letter remained safely in his pocket. Not because it was a secret anymore, but because some memories deserve to be carried forward, not as wounds, but as reminders that even the deepest heartbreak could eventually become the beginning of something beautiful. The first thing Jungkook noticed was that Taehyung had stopped talking about the old house. Not because he had forgotten it, because something had changed. 3 weeks had passed since they had found the letters, and life had returned to its ordinary rhythm. Morning coffee, long conversations, occasional arguments over ridiculous things, quiet evenings when neither of them needed to say anything. Yet Jungkook couldn't shake the feeling that Taehyung was hiding something again. It began with the phone calls. Every night at exactly 11:47 p.m., Taehyung would disappear onto the balcony. He never stayed longer than 5 minutes. And whenever Jungkook asked who had called, Taehyung always gave the same answer. No one important. One night Jungkook finally followed him. The balcony door opened with a soft click. Taehyung was standing beneath the pale moonlight, staring at his phone. His face was strangely still. Who is it? Taehyung immediately locked the screen. You scared me. You've been sneaking out every night. I wasn't sneaking. You were absolutely sneaking. Taehyung sighed. It's complicated. Jungkook leaned against the railing. Everything with you is complicated. A faint smile appeared on Taehyung's lips. That might be my most consistent personality trait. Jungkook smiled too. Then he noticed something. A photograph was lying on the small table. The photograph from the old house. The one showing Taehyung and Minhye. Except this time there was a second photograph beside it. Jungkook picked it up. His smile disappeared. It showed Minhye standing beside another man. A man neither of them had ever mentioned. On the back was a handwritten sentence. He knew the truth. Jungkook looked at Taehyung. Who is this? Taehyung didn't answer. Taehyung. His eyes lowered. I don't know. You're lying. I wish I were. The wind moved between them. Jungkook stared at the photograph again. Where did you get this? It arrived yesterday. Arrived. In the mailbox. From who? Taehyung's silence answered the question. Someone had sent it. Someone who knew about Minhye. Someone who knew about the letters. someone who had waited 5 years before making contact. Jungkook's voice became quieter. What did the message say? Taehyung looked toward the dark street below. Nothing. Taehyung. There was only one sentence. What sentence? Taehyung finally looked at him. Your letter wasn't meant for him. Jungkook felt the air leave his lungs. What? Taehyung handed him the phone. A message appeared on the screen. You spent 5 years believing the wrong story. Jungkook read it twice. Then a second message arrived. Ask Taehyung what happened the night before Minnie died. Taehyung immediately reached for the phone. Don't. Why? Because some things should stay buried. Jungkook stared at him. That sounds familiar. Taehyung's expression broke. You don't understand. Then help me understand. I can't. Why? Because I promised. To whom? Taehyung's eyes filled with tears. To Minnie. The silence that followed felt heavier than the night itself. Jungkook stepped closer. What did you promise him? Taehyung looked away. I promised I would never tell anyone what he asked me to do. Jungkook's heartbeat accelerated. What did he ask? Taehyung closed his eyes. He asked me to forget him. Jungkook frowned. Why? Because he knew he was going to die. The words were barely audible. Jungkook stood motionless. Taehyung continued. The night before the accident, Minnie came to the house. He was terrified. He told me someone was following him. Who? I don't know. You must have some idea. I didn't. Then why didn't you tell anyone? Taehyung's voice cracked. Because he made me promise. That doesn't make sense. I know. Then tell me the rest. Taehyung shook his head. I can't. Jungkook stepped back. For the first time, anger replaced confusion. You've been protecting a secret for 5 years. Yes. And now someone is contacting you. Yes. And you're still trying to protect it. Yes. Even if it puts you in danger. Taehyung didn't answer. That was enough. Jungkook walked toward the door. Where are you going? To the old house. Jungkook, don't. If someone wants us to ask questions, we're going to ask them. You don't know what you're getting into. Jungkook turned around. No, but I know one thing. What? I won't let you face it alone. Taehyung stared at him. Something in his expression softened. Then the phone rang. Both of them froze. The caller ID was hidden. Taehyung answered. Neither spoke. At first there was only static. Then a man's voice came through. Low, calm, almost painfully familiar. Taehyung. Taehyung's face turned white. Jungkook immediately noticed. The voice continued. You kept your promise. Taehyung couldn't breathe. But you forgot one thing. A pause. Minnie never asked you to forget him. The call ended. Jungkook stared at Taehyung. Who was that? Taehyung slowly lowered the phone. His lips trembled. I don't know. Jungkook's eyes narrowed. You recognized the voice. Taehyung said nothing. Taehyung. Finally, Taehyung whispered. It was the voice from the night Minnie died. The room went silent. 5 years of grief suddenly felt like the beginning of a much larger mystery. And somewhere beyond the dark windows, a car engine started. Neither of them saw the vehicle leave. But on the passenger seat lay an old envelope. Across its front were 2 names. Jungkook and Taehyung. And beneath them, written in faded ink. The truth belongs to both of you. The car disappeared into the darkness, but neither Jungkook nor Taehyung noticed. They were still standing on the balcony, trapped inside the weight of a voice that should have belonged to the past. Taehyung lowered himself into the nearest chair. His hands were shaking. Jungkook crouched in front of him. "Look at me." Taehyung didn't. "Taehyung." Slowly, Taehyung lifted his eyes. "You said it was the voice from the night Minnie died." "Yes." "Are you sure?" Taehyung nodded. "I could recognize it anywhere." "Who was the man?" "I never saw his face." "Then how did you hear him?" Taehyung closed his eyes. For several seconds, he seemed unable to speak. Finally, he whispered, because he called the house. Jungkook sat beside him. "What happened?" Taehyung stared at the floor. "It was raining that night." His voice became distant, as though he were no longer sitting in the apartment, but standing 5 years earlier beneath the yellow light of the old house. Minnie came through the back door around midnight. He was soaked, his hands were bleeding. Jungkook listened carefully. "What did he say?" "He told me not to turn on the lights." "Why?" "He thought someone was watching the house." Taehyung's fingers curled tightly. "I thought he was paranoid. I was angry with him because he disappeared for 2 days without telling me anything. And then he apologized for disappearing." "No." Taehyung looked at Jungkook. "For the letter." Jungkook's expression changed. "The love letter?" "Yes." "Why would he apologize for that?" "Because he had found it." Jungkook stared at him. "But you hid it in the wall." "I thought I did." Taehyung swallowed. "That night Minnie told me he'd found the letter before I could hide it. He read it." Jungkook's voice softened. "What did he say?" "He said he was sorry." "Why?" "Because he knew I loved him." The words hung between them. Taehyung looked down. "But he didn't love me in the same way." Jungkook said nothing. "He cared about me, he loved me like family, like someone he wanted to protect, but not romantically." A sad smile crossed Taehyung's face. "That was the truth I had been afraid of." Jungkook reached for his hand. Taehyung allowed their fingers to intertwine. So the letter wasn't a confession that he rejected. No. It was something else. It was goodbye. Taehyung's eyes became wet. He knew he wouldn't survive the night. Jungkook's chest tightened. "What happened after that?" Taehyung looked toward the window. "He told me there was a man he owed money to." Jungkook frowned. "Money?" He had borrowed it to help his younger sister. She was sick. He thought he could repay it after getting a photography job. "And the man?" "He called himself Mr. Han." Jungkook's expression hardened. "Did you ever meet him?" "No." "Then how do you know his name?" "Because Minnie wrote it down." Taehyung stood and walked toward a cabinet. He opened the bottom drawer. Inside was a small notebook wrapped in cloth. He placed it on the table. "This is everything Minnie left behind." Jungkook carefully opened it. Most of the pages contained photographs, dates, camera settings, sketches, and fragments of thoughts. Then he reached the final pages. The handwriting became increasingly hurried. "He knows about Taehyung." Jungkook's eyes moved to the next line. "If something happens to me, keep him away from this." Another sentence followed. "He thinks the letter is about love. Let him believe that." Jungkook stopped. He looked at Taehyung. "Why would Minnie want you to believe the letter was about something else?" "I don't know." Jungkook continued reading. The next page contained only 3 words. "Trust Jungkook." His fingers went still. Taehyung stared at the page. Neither of them spoke. After several seconds, Taehyung whispered, "Why would he write your name?" Jungkook shook his head. "I don't know." "But you didn't know him." No. Did you? Jungkook looked at him. I swear. Taehyung believed him. At least he wanted to. Jungkook turned another page. There was a photograph. It showed a crowded street 5 years earlier. Near the edge of the frame stood a teenage Jungkook. He was looking toward the camera. Jungkook's face went pale. I've never seen this. Taehyung moved closer. You're sure? Yes. Jungkook studied the photograph. Then something strange caught his attention. A small red sign hung behind him. Han Photography Studio. His stomach tightened. Taehyung. What? I remember this place. Taehyung stared at him. You do? Not clearly. Jungkook closed his eyes. Fragments surfaced. A camera flash. Rains. A man shouting. A young Taehyung standing beside a doorway. Then darkness. Jungkook opened his eyes. I think I was there that night. Taehyung stepped back. No. I don't remember everything. No, Jungkook. I might have been there. That's impossible. Why? Because I would have remembered seeing you. Jungkook looked at the photographs. Unless you didn't. Taehyung's breathing became shallow. The possibility frightened him. For 5 years he had believed his memories were complete. Maybe they weren't. Jungkook closed the notebook. We need to go back. To the house. Yes. Tonight. Yes. Taehyung hesitated. Then he nodded. The old house looked different at midnight. The rain had stopped, leaving the garden covered in silver droplets. Jungkook unlocked the front door. The hinges groaned. Inside, the smell of dust and damp wood returned immediately. Taehyung turned on a flashlight. Where should we start? The room where I found the letter. They walked upstairs. Every step creaked beneath their weight. When they reached the room, Jungkook stopped. He looked at the wall. Something's wrong. What? This isn't the same. Taehyung frowned. Jungkook ran his fingers across the wooden panels. One of these boards was replaced. They searched the wall. After several minutes, Jungkook found a loose panel. Behind it was another compartment. But this one contained no letters. There was only a small cassette recorder. Taehyung stared at it. I didn't know this existed. Jungkook picked it up. Dust covered the surface. A handwritten label was attached to it. For Taehyung. Taehyung's hands trembled. Don't play it. Jungkook looked at him. Why? Because I'm afraid. Of what? Of hearing his voice again. Jungkook placed the recorder on the table. You don't have to listen alone. Taehyung looked at him. Then he nodded. Jungkook pressed the button. Static filled the room. Then came a voice. Young. Tired. Frightened. Minyi. Taehyung, if you're hearing this, I'm probably already gone. Taehyung covered his mouth. Jungkook reached for his hand. The recording continued. I know you'll blame yourself, don't. A pause. I know you'll think you should have stopped me, you couldn't. The tape crackled. There is something you don't know. Taehyung leaned closer. The man following me isn't interested in me. Jungkook's eyes narrowed. He's interested in what I found. Another pause. And what I found has nothing to do with money. Taehyung whispered. What did he find? The recording answered. A photograph. Jungkook looked at the picture in his hand. Minyi continued. A photograph of someone who wasn't supposed to be there. The tape clicked. Then his voice became quieter. Jungkook. Jungkook froze. Taehyung stared at him. You need to listen carefully. The recording continued. I don't know who you are yet. I only know that your photograph was inside the man's files. Jungkook's face went blank. Taehyung's fingers tightened around his. If he comes looking for you, don't trust him. Static returned. Then Minyi's final words emerged. Taehyung, the letter you think is a love letter isn't a love letter. The tape stopped. Silence swallowed the room. Taehyung stared at the recorder. Jungkook slowly looked at the envelope they had brought with them. The words on its front suddenly felt different. For the person I could never tell. Taehyung whispered. What did I miss? Jungkook didn't answer. He opened the envelope again. This time he examined every fold, every crease, every mark. Then he noticed something he'd overlooked before. A faint line of writing appeared beneath the paper where the ink had faded. He tilted it toward the flashlight. The hidden words slowly became visible. The person I could never tell was not the person I loved. Taehyung stared. His eyes filled with tears. For 5 years, he had carried the wrong interpretation of his own memories. The letter had never been Minyi's secret confession. It had been a warning. And somehow, Jungkook had always been part of it. Taehyung sat down heavily. I thought I understood everything. Jungkook knelt beside him. You couldn't have known. I should have looked harder. You were grieving. I should have asked questions. You were 17. Taehyung looked at him. What if I had known? Jungkook took his hand. Then maybe you would have been hurt sooner. Taehyung let out a broken laugh. That's supposed to make me feel better. No. Jungkook smiled faintly. It's supposed to remind you that you survived. Taehyung looked down at their intertwined hands. For the first time, the old house didn't feel like a place where something had been taken from him. It felt like a place where something had finally been returned. The truth. Not all of it. But enough to breathe again. They remained there until dawn. When sunlight finally entered through the dusty windows, Taehyung walked toward the wall where he had hidden the letter 5 years earlier. He touched the wood gently. I thought I buried my first love here. Jungkook stood beside him. Maybe you buried your fear. Taehyung looked at him. And what did I find? Jungkook smiled. Someone who stayed. Taehyung's eyes softened. Outside, morning birds began to sing. The past had not disappeared. Minyi was still gone. The questions were still there. The mysterious man had not been identified. But Taehyung no longer felt trapped inside 5 years of silence. He had spent so long believing that love meant holding on to what was lost. Now he understood something different. Sometimes love meant remembering without drowning. Sometimes it meant forgiving yourself for things you could never have controlled. And sometimes it meant looking at the person standing beside you and finally allowing yourself to believe that staying was not another form of losing. Jungkook squeezed his hand. Let's go home. Taehyung nodded. This time he didn't look back at the wall. He didn't need to. The letter had already served its purpose. It had brought the truth into the light. And more importantly, it had brought 2 people who had spent years misunderstanding their own hearts into the same room, where neither of them had to be afraid anymore. Morning arrived quietly. For the first time since they had discovered the letters, Taehyung slept without waking every hour. Jungkook noticed when he opened his eyes and saw sunlight resting across the floor. Taehyung was still asleep on the couch. His face looked younger in the pale morning light, almost like the 17-year-old boy who had once sat inside the old house believing grief was something he had to carry alone. Jungkook stood quietly. He walked to the kitchen and began making coffee. The smell filled the apartment. A few minutes later, Taehyung appeared in the doorway, his hair messy and his eyes half closed. "You're making coffee." Jungkook glanced over. "You say that like it's an emergency." "It is." Jungkook laughed. Taehyung walked over and stole the cup before it was finished. "Hey, you made it. It's mine." "You're too slow." Taehyung took a sip and immediately grimaced. "This is terrible. You just stole it." "I changed my mind." Jungkook laughed again. The sound surprised both of them. For weeks, every conversation had been heavy. Every room seemed filled with questions. But that morning, for a few seconds, they were simply themselves. No letters. No secrets. No ghosts from 5 years ago. Just coffee. Just sunlight. Just the strange comfort of knowing someone had stayed. Then Taehyung placed the cup down. "Jungkook." His voice had changed. "What?" "I want to tell you the rest." Jungkook looked at him. "The whole story." They sat at the kitchen table. Taehyung folded his hands together. "I've spent 5 years remembering that night incorrectly." Jungkook remained silent. "Not because I lied. I know. But because I was scared." Taehyung took a slow breath. "After Minnie left the house that night, I followed him." Jungkook's expression tightened. "You never told me that." "I know." "Why?" "Because I lost sight of him." Taehyung looked down. "I saw him get into a car. I tried to follow but I couldn't." "Do you remember the car?" "Black sedan, no license plate that I could see." "And then?" "I went back to the house." Taehyung's fingers trembled. "That's when the phone rang." "The voice." "Yes." "What did he say?" Taehyung closed his eyes. "He asked me where Minnie had hidden the photograph." Jungkook leaned forward. "And what did you say?" "I told him I didn't know what he was talking about." "Did he believe you?" "I don't think so." Taehyung's voice became quieter. "He said something strange." "What?" "He said, then you'll have to learn to live without him." Jungkook felt a chill move through him. "That was the last thing you heard?" "No." Taehyung looked directly at him. "There was another sentence." "What?" "He said, and don't trust the boy named Jungkook." Jungkook went completely still. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. "Why would he know my name?" "I don't know." "Did you know me then?" "No." "Had Minnie ever mentioned me?" "Not once." Jungkook stood and walked toward the window. The city was beginning to wake. Cars moved through the streets. People carried coffee cups. Someone laughed outside. Ordinary life continued, while the past quietly rearranged itself inside his mind. "What if the photograph wasn't about me?" Jungkook asked. Taehyung frowned. "What do you mean?" "Maybe Minnie wasn't investigating me." "Then why was your photograph in the files?" "I don't know." Jungkook turned. "But maybe I wasn't the person he was protecting." Taehyung stared at him. "Who else could it be?" Jungkook looked at the photographs. The answer came slowly. "Your grandmother." Taehyung's face changed. "My grandmother. She owned the house." "Yes." "She knew Minnie." "Yes." "She let him stay there." "Yes." Jungkook placed the photograph on the table. Maybe Minnie discovered something about the house. Taehyung stared at the photograph. Then another memory surfaced. His grandmother had always forbidden him from entering the attic. Not because it was dangerous. Because she said there were things inside that belonged to another time. Taehyung suddenly stood. "The attic." Jungkook looked at him. "What?" "She never let me go up there." "Your grandmother?" "Yes." "Why?" She said it was full of old things. Jungkook grabbed his jacket. Then that's where we're going. The old house looked brighter in daylight. Without the darkness, it almost seemed harmless. They entered through the front door and climbed the narrow staircase. At the top was a small wooden door. Taehyung tried the handle. Locked. I've never seen the key. Jungkook examined the lock. Maybe we don't need one. He noticed a small gap beneath the door. Something metallic glimmered inside. He crouched and reached beneath it. His fingers touched a key. Taehyung stared. That wasn't there before. Jungkook picked it up. A small brass tag was attached. One word was engraved on it. Remember. Taehyung's breath caught. He inserted the key. The lock clicked. The attic door opened. Dust drifted through the sunlight. The room smelled of old paper, cedar, and something faintly sweet. Jasmine. Taehyung stepped inside. Boxes covered the floor. Old photographs lined the walls. There were letters, diaries, newspapers, and dozens of photographs of people Taehyung had never seen. Jungkook walked toward a wooden desk. A black notebook rested on top. He opened it. The first page contained a familiar handwriting. Taehyung's grandmother. If you're reading this, then the truth has finally become impossible to hide. Taehyung moved closer. His eyes widened. Why would she write that? Jungkook continued reading. Minhee was not the first person to discover what happened here. The next page contained a name. Han Seong-ho. Taehyung recognized it. Mr. Han. Jungkook nodded. Keep reading. The diary explained everything. Mr. Han had once worked with Taehyung's grandmother. He had managed an old photography studio in the neighborhood. Years earlier, he had discovered that several valuable photographs had been stolen from the studio. But the photographs weren't ordinary. They documented a series of illegal transactions involving influential people. Minhee had accidentally discovered the archive while working there. He had copied several images. One of those images showed a young man standing outside the studio. That young man was Jungkook. But Jungkook hadn't been involved in anything. He had simply been there. He had been photographed unknowingly. The photograph became important because it proved that Minhee had visited the studio on a particular night. A night Mr. Han had claimed Minhee had never entered the building. Jungkook read the passage twice. So I was evidence. Taehyung nodded slowly. Not a suspect. Just a witness. Without knowing it. The truth finally made sense. Minhee hadn't been hiding a romantic secret. He had been hiding evidence. And Taehyung's love letter had been hidden alongside it, because Minhee knew Taehyung would search for it after his death. He had trusted Taehyung to find the emotional truth first. The evidence would come later. Taehyung turned another page. There was a letter from his grandmother. Minhee asked me to protect Taehyung. He knew the truth would put him in danger. So I helped him hide everything. Taehyung's eyes filled with tears. She knew. Jungkook nodded. She knew all along. Why didn't she tell me? Because she wanted you to have a normal life. Taehyung sat on the floor. For years he had been angry at himself. He had believed he had missed something. He had believed he could have saved Minhee if only he had been smarter. Now he understood. There had never been anything he could have done. Minhee had deliberately kept him away from the truth. Not because he didn't trust him. Because he loved him enough to protect him. Taehyung covered his face. I spent 5 years blaming myself. Jungkook sat beside him. You didn't fail him. Taehyung's shoulders trembled. I thought I did. You were a kid. I should have known. No. Jungkook placed a hand on his shoulder. You survived something you didn't understand. Taehyung looked at him. Does that make it okay? No. Jungkook's voice softened. But it makes it human. Taehyung leaned against him. For several minutes neither spoke. Then Taehyung laughed quietly through his tears. Minnie always said I cried too easily. Jungkook smiled. He was probably right. Taehyung lightly punched his shoulder. You're supposed to comfort me. I am. You're terrible at it. And yet you're still sitting here. Taehyung smiled. Yes. He was. And that mattered. They spent the afternoon organizing the documents. They discovered enough evidence to explain why Minnie had been frightened and why someone had spent years trying to keep the photographs hidden. But there was no dramatic confrontation. No mysterious figure bursting through the door. No final threat. Instead, there was something quieter. The truth. Sometimes the most powerful ending to a mystery wasn't revenge. It was understanding. Before leaving, Taehyung returned to the desk. He picked up the original love letter. He unfolded it carefully. Then he placed it beside Minnie's photograph. I think this belongs here. Jungkook nodded. Taehyung looked at the photograph one last time. I loved you. His voice was barely audible. And I always will. He smiled sadly. But I'm not staying here anymore. He closed the notebook. Jungkook waited beside the stairs. When Taehyung joined him, they walked downstairs together. Outside, evening had begun to settle over the garden. The jasmine bushes moved gently in the breeze. Taehyung stopped at the gate. Jungkook. Yes, thank you. For what? For finding the letter. Jungkook smiled. You're welcome. Taehyung looked back at the house. For 5 years, I thought that letter was the saddest thing I'd ever written. And now, Taehyung looked at Jungkook. Now I think it was the first honest thing I ever wrote. Jungkook held out his hand. Taehyung took it. They walked away from the house together. Behind them, the old windows reflected the last light of the day. The house kept its memories. The letters remained inside. The photographs remained on the desk. And Minnie remained part of a story that would never completely disappear. But Taehyung no longer carried the past like a punishment. He carried it like a photograph. Something precious. Something real. Something that could be looked at without being trapped inside it. Jungkook glanced at him. You know what I think. What? I think the letter wasn't meant to make you look backward. Taehyung smiled. Then what was it meant to do? Make you brave enough to look forward. Taehyung squeezed his hand. For the first time in 5 years, the future didn't feel frightening. It felt open. And somewhere between the fading sunlight and the quiet sound of their footsteps, Taehyung finally understood what Minnie had wanted him to learn all those years ago. Love did not disappear when someone left. It changed. It became memory. It became gratitude. It became strength. And sometimes, unexpectedly, it became the courage to open your heart again. Taehyung looked at Jungkook. Let's go home. Jungkook smiled. Together. Taehyung nodded. Together. And this time neither of them looked back. 3 days after leaving the old house, Jungkook woke to the sound of glass breaking. He jumped out of bed. Taehyung. No answer. Another sound came from the living room. A sharp metallic scrape. Jungkook grabbed his phone and rushed down the hallway. Taehyung was standing beside the window, completely motionless. Broken glass glittered across the floor. The curtains moved in the cold morning air. What happened? Taehyung didn't respond. Jungkook followed his gaze. A small black envelope lay on the carpet beneath the broken window. Jungkook's stomach tightened. Did someone throw that? Taehyung nodded. Jungkook approached carefully. Don't touch it. Taehyung's voice was barely audible. Jungkook stopped. There was something different about Taehyung's expression. Not fear. Recognition. You know what that is. Taehyung nodded slowly. I've seen it before. When? 5 years ago. Jungkook stared at him. Where? Taehyung looked toward the broken window. Outside the old house. Jungkook's pulse quickened. You never told me. I didn't remember. Until now. Taehyung nodded. He crouched several feet away from the envelope. There was a man standing outside that night. What did he look like? I couldn't see his face. Then how do you know it was the same person? Taehyung pointed toward the envelope. The symbol. A tiny silver mark had been stamped onto the black paper. 3 intersecting lines forming a shape like an open eye. Jungkook remembered seeing the same symbol in Minnie's notebook. He felt a chill move down his spine. This isn't over. Taehyung looked at him. No. Jungkook carefully used a pair of gloves to pick up the envelope. Inside was a photograph. Nothing else. The photograph showed the old house. But it wasn't a photograph from 5 years ago. It had been taken that morning. Jungkook could see the date printed in the corner. Today. Someone had been watching them. Taehyung moved closer. Turn it over. Jungkook did. A sentence had been written on the back. You found the truth, now find the reason. Jungkook stared at the words. The reason for what? Taehyung shook his head. I don't know. Jungkook looked at the photograph again. Something about it bothered him. The angles. The lighting. The position of the trees. Then he noticed a reflection in one of the old house windows. A person standing inside. Jungkook zoomed in with his phone. His breathing stopped. Taehyung. What? Look. The figure was blurred, but the clothing was unmistakable. A dark coat. A grey scarf. And a camera hanging around the neck. Taehyung stared at the image. No. What? That scarf. You recognize it? Taehyung nodded. It belonged to Minnie. The room became silent. Jungkook stared at him. Are you sure? I gave it to him. When? 2 weeks before he died. Jungkook's mind raced. But if that's his scarf, it can't be. Taehyung stepped backward. Minnie died 5 years ago. Then someone has it. Why would they? Jungkook looked at the photographs. Because they want us to think he's still alive. Taehyung's face went pale. No. It's possible. No. Taehyung, listen to me. No. Taehyung covered his ears. I saw him. Jungkook stopped. What? I saw him after the accident. His voice broke. I saw his body. Jungkook's expression softened. I know. So don't tell me he might be alive. I wasn't. You were thinking it. Jungkook took a breath. I was thinking someone wants you to believe it. Taehyung slowly lowered his hands. That possibility was somehow worse. Because if someone had deliberately recreated Minnie's appearance, then they weren't simply exposing an old secret. They were manipulating Taehyung's grief. And whoever they were knew exactly which memories would hurt the most. That afternoon, Jungkook returned to the old house alone. Taehyung wanted to come. Jungkook refused. You've already been through enough. Taehyung frowned. You don't get to decide that. I know. Then don't. Jungkook sighed. Fine, come with me. They entered the house just before sunset. The attic looked exactly as they had left it. Dust, photographs, old boxes, the diary. Nothing appeared disturbed. Until Taehyung noticed the desk. Jungkook. A photograph was missing. The one of Minhee. Jungkook looked at the empty space. Someone was here. They searched the attic. Nothing. Then Taehyung remembered something. The floorboard. What about it? There was a loose one. Jungkook moved toward the corner. Together they lifted it. Beneath it was a narrow metal tube. Inside was a rolled piece of paper. Taehyung opened it. His eyes widened. It was a map. Not of the city. Of the old photography studio. Several rooms had been marked. One was circled in red. The basement. Jungkook looked at Taehyung. Do you know what's there? No. Then we're going. The studio had been abandoned for years. Its windows were boarded. The sign above the entrance was faded. Inside, the air smelled of mold and old chemicals. Their footsteps echoed through the empty hallway. Jungkook switched on his flashlight. Stay close. Taehyung nodded. They found the basement entrance behind a collapsed shelf. The stairs descended into darkness. At the bottom was a steel door. It wasn't locked. Jungkook pushed it open. The smell hit them first. Dust, metal, old photographic chemicals. The walls were covered with photographs. Hundreds of them. Some were faded. Others were surprisingly clear. Taehyung walked slowly through the room. Then he stopped. Jungkook. He was staring at one photograph. Jungkook came beside him. It showed Minhee. Alive. Standing in the basement. And beside him was Mr. Han. But that wasn't what shocked them. Behind the two men stood another person. A teenage Jungkook. Jungkook stared at the image. I don't remember this. Taehyung's eyes filled with confusion. You said you remembered being near the studio. I remembered a street. Not this. No. Jungkook touched the photograph. Then a strange sensation passed through him. A camera flash. A metallic door. Someone shouting. A hand grabbing his shoulder. Then a voice. Don't look behind you. Jungkook stumbled backward. Taehyung caught him. Jungkook. I remember. What? I was here. Taehyung stared at him. Jungkook's breathing became uneven. I was inside this room. When? The night Minhee died. Taehyung's face changed. What happened? Jungkook closed his eyes. I don't know. He pressed his fingers against his temple. There was someone behind me. Who? I couldn't see. Jungkook. I heard Minhee. What did he say? Jungkook opened his eyes. He told me to run. Taehyung went silent. Jungkook looked around the basement. There was a small table in the corner. On it sat an old camera. Beside the camera was a cassette. A handwritten label read. Last frame. Jungkook picked it up. Taehyung whispered. Don't. But Jungkook had already noticed something else. The camera had a memory card inside. He turned it on. The screen flickered. A single video appeared. 5 years old. Jungkook pressed play. The image shook violently. Minhee appeared on screen. He was breathing heavily. Behind him was the same basement. Taehyung, he said. Taehyung covered his mouth. Minyi looked directly into the camera. If you're watching this, then they found the archive. He paused. And if Jungkook is with you? Jungkook froze. Minyi's expression changed. He remembers. Taehyung turned toward Jungkook. Jungkook couldn't speak. The recording continued. Jungkook doesn't remember because someone made sure he wouldn't. A loud noise came from somewhere behind Minyi. He looked over his shoulder, then back at the camera. Taehyung, there's something you need to know. His voice became quieter. The man you thought was chasing me wasn't trying to kill me. Taehyung stared at the screen. He was trying to protect us. The video abruptly ended. No explanation. No names. No final answer. Just silence. Jungkook stared at the dark screen. Taehyung slowly turned toward him. Who was he? Jungkook shook his head. I don't know. Then the basement lights suddenly turned on. Both of them froze. They had not touched the switch. A speaker crackled above them. A man's voice filled the room. You've taken long enough. Taehyung grabbed Jungkook's arm. The voice continued. You've spent 5 years looking for a love story. A pause. But the real story was never about love. Jungkook looked toward the ceiling. Who are you? A quiet laugh echoed through the basement. You already know me. The speaker went silent. Then a door slammed somewhere upstairs. Jungkook and Taehyung looked at each other. For the first time, neither moved. The mystery had changed. It was no longer about Minyi. It was about Jungkook. And somewhere inside his forgotten memories was an answer that had been deliberately taken from him 5 years ago.